This is the morning of the 1st of November, 2025. This clip was put up by the Daily Beast. It plays for almost 44 minutes. I'm not going to play it for 44 minutes. If anything, I'll do it in two parts, or just do the first part for around 20 minutes, and you'll have it to watch in its entirety. Title: Trump's Cognitive Collapse is Clear, Psychologist. Let's listen to what the psychologist has to say.
Trump, because of his cognitive decline, is focusing on things like the ballroom and the paper that he writes things on. If any of you have ever had someone who, in your family or friends who had dementia, one of the things you'll notice is they'll pick up on one concrete physical detail, and then they'll free associate to that detail, completely leaving the conversation, whatever the original topic of the conversation was. Let's set the stage. He's brought 1,200 generals from around the world, right, for this very important meeting. And you'll have to forgive me, I automatically go into my Trump voice when I do this. When I have a general, and I have to sign for a general because we have beautiful paper, gorgeous paper, I said, put a little more gold on it. They deserve it. I want the A paper, not the D paper. We used to sign that piece of garbage. I said, this guy's going to be a general, right? I want to use the big, beautiful, firm paper. I want to use the real gold writing. After all the work you do to become a general or an admiral, your commission, that commission is beautifully displayed, and I sign it. You know, I actually love my signature. Everybody loves my signature. But I sign it very proudly, and I think to myself, how can you have an auto pen do this? So disrespectful to me. It's totally disrespectful. As it turns out, almost everything he did was by auto pen, except when he gave his son Hunter a pardon. He signed that one. Actually, it's the worst signature I've ever seen. The auto pen looks better. It's right there in plain sight. We're all seeing it. But no one's calling it. It's like the emperor has no brain, but the media is afraid to say it. The professionals are afraid to say it.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast, and no one has provoked more comments from you than our podcast with Dr. John Gartner. He was an assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University for 28 years. He's a psychotherapist in private practice, and for a long time he had the podcast Shrinking Trump, where he analysed Donald Trump, the president, through his own words. And his argument has always been that he's actually a very straightforward person to diagnose for a shrink because there's so much of him out there. Donald Trump is a man who's been astride the modern media, whatever form it's taken, for, well, I was going to say hundreds of years. It feels like hundreds of years, but dozens of years. So actually there is a baseline against which to diagnose his thought processes that we see in his weaves and his endless conversations and press conferences going on right now. So no time to waste. I'm armed with many of the questions that you had for the doctor. We're going to get straight into it. Dr. Gardner is someone who's studied psychotherapy, psychiatry, personality disorder, dementia, from thousands of people. Can you give us your diagnosis again, and then let's see what you've seen coming out of Trump's behavior over the last month?
His personality disorder is a rare, a severe personality disorder called malignant narcissism. Malignant narcissism is actually a personality disorder that was first introduced by Erich Fromm in the 1940s when he escaped Hitler. And it was his attempt to explain the psychology of Hitler and other evil dictators like Hitler. So he was meant to describe it as a type. So when I compare Trump to Hitler, what I'm saying is we can argue about the differences, but the essential similarity is that they're cut from the same cloth. They have the same personality disorder. And I predicted before Trump was elected the first time that he would rule like Hitler because he has the same personality disorder as Hitler. And now finally, of course, sadly, we're seeing that he is actually following Hitler's playbook almost to the letter.
John, is there the possibility that you're being alarmist here, that the parallels you're making to Adolf Hitler are parallels that Donald Trump wants you to make because he wants to frighten people? But actually the fact that you and I can talk openly about this is a sign that we're not in Germany hurtling towards 1941 or 1942. Is this, are you confident that the diagnosis you make is not alarmist?
Well, I think you're about 8 years late with that question. Because when I first started saying it, I got a lot of pushback from journalists who were saying, well, come on, it's not like he's going to form concentration camps, stop calling him Hitler. And I said, no, he will form concentration camps. And I don't know if you remember this, but in his first administration, he was building out camps in the desert to keep immigrants, and they were building out a capacity for 250,000 beds. That was his plan. Then, with the childhood separation plan, it became so abhorrent. That was the one thing that the country really pushed back on, that he kind of backed off the concentration camp for immigrants. Now he's going full tilt. I mean, think about this. They're literally just snatching people off the street, whether they're citizens or not citizens, whether they have ID or don't have ID. Masked secret police, right? Beating people up, smashing their windows, abducting them, disappearing them. Then people can't even find out where they are. Putting them in camps, or in the most extreme case, putting them on a plane to death camps. Okay, I often explain that a concentration camp is not a death camp. The internment of Japanese in World War II was a concentration camp. Concentration camp means we're concentrating an undesirable population because of their race or their religion or whatever in an enclosed prison-like village, okay, or area. That's a concentration camp. It becomes a death camp when you start killing them. So what he's doing with these third world countries is he's outsourcing the death camp part. So they can just disappear people into these third world hellholes and never to be seen again. So that's just one example of, I don't think it's alarmist, okay? At this point, we're past Kristallnacht, okay? It's not alarmist anymore, it's happening. Just look on social media.
Watch what sourdough does to your love handles.
Sourdough?
Real sourdough that is fermented for...
Yeah, so stupid ad just popped up. A multi-processing.
One of the things that people find very interesting, when you're reading about history, or indeed when you're looking at what's going on around the world now, is how can one man manage to amass so much power and so much sycophancy around him? And you think of Vladimir Putin, who's also managed to create the same environment for himself, and indeed there are many strong men, as they're being called. Are they all malignant narcissists? Is that an ingredient that you need to be a strongman leader?
Yes, the short answer is yes. That's the type that Eric Fromm was talking about. And one of the things that these people do, our colleague Robert J. Lifton recently passed away. He's been studying malignant narcissism in leaders for like 60 years. And one of the terms that he came up with is malignant normality. And malignant normality is when a malignant narcissist takes control of their society and establishes a new set of norms, establishes a new reality through propaganda, and basically converts the entire country to their psychosis, converts the entire country to, or most of it, to operating under their delusional, destructive beliefs. So that's what's happening right now. The way in which, now all liberals are being labeled as Antifa. Recently Carolyn Levitt said all Democrats, the only Democrats are people who are Hamas terrorists and left-wing terrorists, and I forget what the other group was.
That was truly a disturbing, very strange comment.
But the demonization of the opposition, the dehumanization of the opposition, the shutting down of free speech, the demonization of an ethnic minority. I've said this over and over again. As a Jewish person, I need to say immigrants are the new Jews. When my people say never again, we don't just mean never again to Jews. We mean never again to any ethnic group. And now these immigrants are being treated in much the same way the Jews were. They're being knocked to the ground, disappeared, put in camps, and in some cases, yes, death camps. El Salvador is a death camp. We know from Abrego Garcia that they were told over and over again, you will never live outside of this camp. And we'll talk about this later, but Stephen Miller, I think, is also an extremely disturbed individual. He is, and I'm not saying this is a joke, a Jewish Nazi. He is actually showing a identification with the aggressor. It's actually a defense mechanism that Anna Freud identified, where you identify with your oppressor. You identify with the person who's abusing you. It's a very common psychological phenomenon, actually. That's why a lot of people who have been abused as children become abusive adults. We're going to talk about Trump's cognitive decline. A lot before the election, people say, well, what's going to happen if this dementia gets worse in the White House? And I said, well, it's going to be like the weekend at Bernie's White House. Trump, because of his cognitive decline, is focusing on things like the ballroom and the paper that he writes things on. And, he's sort of meandering about all of these sort of side issues. But the real driver of the Hitlerian agenda is actually Stephen Miller. And I think people need to know that.
Perhaps we'll do a special episode on Stephen Miller and get you to analyse some of his dialogue for us. In terms of Donald Trump, he's a malignant narcissist, you say. You also say that he's suffering from some level of dementia, and you gave us some incredible examples, one of which triggered all sorts of people. And this was when he was saying, and I'm going to read it, I'm quoting you here, he was saying that they're going to send all these immigrants from insane asylums, and then he goes, anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? And then he goes, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Nobody likes to talk about him anymore. And everybody remembered that exchange, and your explanation of it being a symptom of dementia was very helpful. Can you re-explain that for people who didn't hear it the first time?
Sure. So it's a chain of loose associations, right? So he's telling a lie. He's saying that all these immigrants are coming from insane asylums. Okay, so that's the malignant narcissism. He's just lying. But then thinking about an insane asylum reminds him, oh, I saw a movie about insane asylums. Okay, and then that makes him remember the main character from the movie. And that makes him think, hey, whatever happened to that guy? No one ever talks about him anymore. So we're seeing like a stone skipping along the water. He's going from one association to another, but it doesn't make any linear sense. So saying, hey, nobody ever talks about the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Well, first of all, he's a fictional character, so he can't be dead. But how did you get there from immigrants coming from insane asylums? Because he had this loose chain of association.
And is it a loose chain because it sounds like something? Because one of the other symptoms you noticed was that people who are beginning to suffer dementia can't often say the whole word, so they go kirsch instead of Christmas. That was an example you gave us.
Yes, it's called phonemic paraphasias. They can't complete the word properly, so they just kind of add a nonsense ending. So you can't say Christmas, you say Christus, or missiles, missus.
Right.
And there are dozens and dozens of examples of that. And they're on social media almost like as kind of supercuts of like things to make fun of him or to be humorous. But they're actually very serious signs, very serious and well-known medical signs of dementia. People don't make those kinds of phonemic paraphasias if they're tired or if they're aging. That's just not something they do. It's something very specific that is linked to dementia and organic cognitive decline. And actually, in terms of this sort of sounds like, I think I might have mentioned last time that, someone asked him a question about Harvard, and then he went on to talk about Harlem, and it wasn't just that he misunderstood the word, because then he goes back and circles back and says, and the people in Harlem, they really approve of what we're doing at Harvard. What they had in common is they begin with H. Other than that, I think we would agree that Harlem and Harvard are very different places.
So we've seen a lot of Donald Trump on the world stage and many stages. I mean, he gives endless press conferences. We simply can't complain that we don't see enough of him. You also referenced sometimes people with dementia have phases of great grandiosity, and one couldn't help thinking last week when he was claiming peace in the Middle East. They said it couldn't be done. It's taken 3,000 years, but here I am. But that was far from being modest, which a lot of actual peacemakers are. He put himself centre stage, and unfortunately we've already seen a slight outbreaking of fighting over the weekend, and I think a more sort of modest person might have thought this might take some time. You can't, just because you say it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Well, the grandiosity is certainly part of his personality disorder. These things interact, so it's easy to kind of, in real life, they get confused or they interact with each other. But his cognitive decline is a physiological thing that's been deteriorating now over a number of years. His personality disorder is who he is and who he's always been, although that also gets worse over time. Eric Fromm said that people with malignant narcissism tend to get worse because with any degree of success, their grandiosity becomes inflamed, their paranoia becomes inflamed, their sense that I can do no wrong becomes disinhibited, their violence against others becomes disinhibited, both because they feel they can do anything they want and because they're becoming increasingly grandiose and paranoid. And the other thing is, though, when we see people with dementia, whatever personality disorder they have tends to get dramatically worse, more disinhibited, more sort of grossly raw, more primitive. I think we're seeing that with him too. So what we're really seeing is he has the worst personality disorder a human being can have, but now as he cognitively deteriorates, he expresses it in ways that are more impulsive, more coarse, more disorganized. We'll talk maybe about some of his AI videos.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. When you said, they become more coarse and disinhibited. I mean, yesterday he released an AI video of him flying a plane over Times Square and then it opening a whole ton of sewage and dropping on the people below. That seems something that a 9-year-old boy is more likely to do, not the leader of the free world.
Right, exactly. So it shows that kind of disinhibited, it's the real him. I know there's a lot of controversy about the pee-pee tape. One of the things that or the alleged pee-pee tape, one of the things I've always said about it is, whether or not it's true, it's certainly in character. Because someone with malignant narcissism wants to defile and degrade other people. They get immense sexual pleasure out of it. They're sadists. What's one of the components of malignant narcissism? It's narcissism, paranoia, antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, and sadism, those 4 components. So the idea that he really just wants to shit on everyone who disagrees with him, that's like literally how he feels because of the personality disorder. The other thing, though, about his recent talks is we talked about his confusing Harvard and Harlem. Recently, he's been confusing India and Iran. He's been talking about Pakistan being at war with Iran, and he's trying to broker a peace, and he says Iran several times when he's talking about India.
As an example, if you look at Pakistan and Iran, I told them I was in the midst of negotiating a trade deal with Iran, and Pakistan was going to be in line.
Well, Chris, what do those two countries have in common? They begin with I.
Right.
Sort of like Harvard and Harlem. So that's the level of free association we're talking about.
And is that just because he's the president and he's got a lot of details to keep on top of? I mean, I agree that getting India and Iran confused is potentially a deadly mistake. But is there any benefit of the doubt you could give him that he's, trying to master a ton of detail here?
Well, look, as an older person, I tend to give people a lot of benefit of the doubt. I mean, even on my own podcast, sometimes I say, oh, yeah, the person from Germany, what's his name? Then we have to edit that out. But he tends to mishmash them together in a way that shows a deeper level of thought disorder. For example, the other thing he was saying about India and Pakistan is he's saying, well, then I think he's starting to say India now. He's saying, well, India's had a lot of change of leadership. They haven't really been stable. That's true of Pakistan. It's not true of India. So first he confuses their names, then he confuses the countries themselves, their political leadership and their history. So it's one thing to get a name wrong, maybe even to reverse it, although that still seems very rare, but he's actually confusing the countries themselves.
I've played 18 minutes and 13 seconds out of a 43-minute and 35-second video. You want to watch the rest of it. But I'll tell you what's horrifying to me is we've got someone that doesn't even know where he is half the time, which we clearly saw him demonstrate when he was in Japan. And he's talking about dropping nuclear bombs again, or testing nuclear bombs. I think he wants to destroy the entire world. He knows it's only a matter of time before he gets fully entrapped and exposed with the Epstein files. So he's going to take the whole world with him. You think not? Sure as hell hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Do you?